think we're on. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lorenzo Vidino, and I'm the director of the program on extremism at the George Washington University. I'm delighted to welcome everybody to today's event on the Muslim Brotherhood and the West. The topic is an evergreen, let me say that. It's endlessly debated throughout Europe and North America. It's a topic that divides. Opinion ranges from those that argue that the Brotherhood should be designated as a terrorist organization, as it is in some Arab countries, to those that argue that it's a politically moderate movement that fully accepts the democratic process. In Western countries, the Brotherhood is also a topic that touches several policy areas. It is often seen through the lenses of foreign policy, looking at its branches in the Middle East and their different vicissitudes. I think just today, the big story is the fact that a Jordanian court has dissolved the local branch of the Brotherhood. That's an interesting development. But there are also substantial reasons for Western governments to look at the Brotherhood from a domestic point of view. And this indeed seems to be a growing tendency in most Western countries, particularly in Europe. So lots to talk about when it comes to the Brotherhood. And we thought of organizing this online event with two top experts with very different backgrounds, but both uniquely qualified. And I'm very proud to say both of them I've known them for years and have become good friends with. So I want to take this opportunity to thank both of them for taking the time to be with us today. This is how we would like to structure the event today. First, we will hear from Sir John Jenkins for some 10-15 minutes. And then we move it to Ahmed Akkari, who will speak for a similar time. Then I will shamelessly take advantage of the platform to offer my own observations. We will then open it to questions. So I urge everybody that is listening in to type their questions. And we'll try to have the panelists answer to as many as possible. We will try to close at 5 Washington times, fairly sharp. So we have 1 hour time. For that reason, without further ado, let me introduce the first speaker, although he needs no introduction. Sir John Jenkins had a stellar 35-year-long career in the British diplomatic service, most of which spent in the Middle East. He served as director for the Middle East and North Africa for the Foreign Office and as ambassador to various countries, including Iraq, Libya, and Saudi Arabia. In 2014, he was appointed by Prime Minister David Cameron to lead the policy review into the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam. He recently retired from the service and is currently a senior fellow with Policy Exchange in London. Sir John, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lorenzo. The last time we did something like this, it was a physical event in DC about 3 years ago, I think.
Well, correct.
Time flies. Let me talk a bit about how the Brotherhood Review arose and how I conducted it, and broadly what the sort of areas of study and conclusions were, and then talk. I want to say something about the situation in the Middle East, particularly the Gulf, because that's the area I know best since then, and the reasons why governments in the region, in particular, take this issue so seriously. So David Cameron asked me to do the review. It didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, Cameron had made a speech about political Islamisms at the Munich Security Conference in, I think, 2012, when he talked. And his focus, of course, was very much about integration and the dangers to the liberal order in Europe in particular, the United Kingdom in particular, the United Kingdom specifically, arising out of the political deployment of Islam by political Islamists. But of course, because of the Arab Spring and what had happened during the Arab Spring, whether we call it the so-called Arab Spring or whether we just call it the Arab Spring, I think he'd become more sensitive to the foreign policy issues as well. And of course, he was then Prime Minister when he made the Munich Security Conference speech just before he became Prime Minister. So he asked me to do it. It was a bolt out of the blue. I wasn't expecting this, and he gave me 3 months to do it. which, considering that most academics and other people who study the Brotherhood spend their entire lives doing this, was a tall order. Eventually, it took me 6 months, simply because I had other things to do in my day job as ambassador to Saudi Arabia. But I visited, I think, 13 countries. I enlisted the late Charles Farr, who was a former colleague of mine in foreign service, but was then at the Home Office dealing with counterterrorism and security issues. And we divided the tasks. I did the external chapter, which is very long, and Charles did the internal chapter. Between us, we must have interviewed 100 to 150 different people, most of them brothers, some of them commentators, all with an agreed schedule of questions and so forth. It was pretty rigorous. And then I produced a report and gave it to Cameron, and then I left the Foreign Service shortly afterwards. These two issues, the concern about the impact of political Islamism or Islamisms on the domestic politics of an individual country in Europe, and the concern about the impact of political Islamisms on the stability, security, political dispensations and so forth of countries, particularly in the Middle East, with whom our foreign policy was very closely bound up, came together very acutely in this period. Cameron did not stipulate what the conclusions should be, and he didn't take instructions from people outside. And there was a lot of speculation at the time that he'd been pressed into this by the Saudis and the Emiratis. That was simply not true. The Saudis in particular would much rather we hadn't started this, for various reasons, which are interesting in themselves to talk about. And the Emiratis, who of course had concerns about the Brotherhood in particular, but all sorts of political Islamism, had spoken to him, but he didn't do it because of what they said. He did it because that's what he was concerned about. I mean, the central issue was the issue of, or became, I should say, it wasn't this at the beginning, but it certainly became a central issue, the issue of to prescribe or not to prescribe. My conclusions, well, first of all, it became clear from quite early on how little joined up knowledge we within the British government had about the Brotherhood and about Islamisms of all sorts. And when we did look at the subject, there was a tendency, to do it in a very disaggregated way. So when we were looking externally, we were looking at what is happening in Egypt, but separately what is happening in Jordan, what is happening in Morocco, what is happening in Lebanon, and so forth. And none of this was properly joined up within the Foreign Office, and government as a whole was not properly joined up. So you had different people pursuing different lines of inquiry with slightly different policies in the Home Office and the Foreign Office and the communities, the Ministry, the communities and community cohesion bits of the Whitehall infrastructure and so forth. And even when we did come together, we tended to look at the Brotherhood and other Islamisms through Western prisms. So, putting it crudely, this is where this idea that the Brotherhood was just an Arab version or an Islamic version of Christian Democrats came from. I recall Steinmeier making a big song and dance about this. And that's a category error, because they're not. Because the traditions within which they work, the political sociologies within which they work, and the political philosophies they have are not the same as those that are adopted by what, on the face of it, sometimes look like analogous movements or parties in Europe. So the first of my conclusions was we needed to get better at knowing what we were talking about. Interestingly, since then, my colleague and friend Martin Frampton, who's a Queen Mary in London, he's a historian, has written an extremely good book about the Muslim Brotherhood in the West, which goes back to the 1930s and ransacks the archives. And if you want an account of how unstable the knowledge base in the West and policy advice in the West has been about the Muslim Brotherhood in particular, but this applies more generally, That's a very good place to start. It looks at Britain, it looks at the United States in particular, but it is quite alarming to see how erratic we have been in thinking about these issues. Now, there's a second issue: how important is this? Certainly, at the time of the Arab Spring, it became an acute issue for many governments in the region. Now, some people might say, well, that's because they're facing a revolutionary moment. Nobody likes a revolution. I think it's far more complex than that. And I think different governments and different institutions within different countries have different reasons for looking at Islamism and the Brotherhood in particular in the way they do. But again, this wasn't something we'd actually thought enough about until it was presented acutely at the time of the Arab Spring, when we had to make choices. And I think a lot of the choices we made were wrong. The issue of prescription was and remains very sensitive. I mean, I thought at the time, and said so to Cameron, and I still think that prescription of the Muslim Brotherhood is entirely the wrong way, the wrong policy to adopt. First of all, what is it that you're prescribing? I mean, there is an issue of identifying who is a Muslim brother, and then if somebody is a Muslim brother, it's not a crime to be a Muslim brother. And if you criminalize it in the West, it's very hard to see what exactly it is you're criminalizing. This isn't to say that I think the Brotherhood is not a threat to cohesion in the West or in the Middle East, because I think it is. But it's a different sort of problem. And the problem is ideological, generally ideological, rather than one of armed revolution or violence or force. Although it is also true that the Brotherhood, from their foundation, have had a doctrine of physical force. The real distinction between the Brotherhood and someone like an organization like Daesh, for example, is that for the Brotherhood, violence is a means to an end. It's tactical. It's, as Hassan al-Banna made clear, this was something to be used when you had a chance of success, and success meant a chance of taking power and implementing the program of the Brotherhood. But it wasn't in itself an aim. It was a means to an end. But the ideological threat is considerable. And of course, now it goes together with all the other sort of ideational and identity politic threats or challenges that we see all around us now. So it's part of a much wider piece. Just very quickly about the Middle East as a whole. I mean, I was ambassador to Saudi at the time. The Saudis didn't want us to do this, but I spoke to them extensively. And it is interesting because, of course, the Saudis had backed the Brotherhood extensively from the late 50s onwards. They tried to save Said Qutb, for example, from being executed.
John, can I interrupt you for just a second for a technical thing?
Yeah.
I think you might be playing with something that is near your microphone, and sometimes it's creating a bit of a noise. So
okay.
I'm Italian. I always gesticulate, so I fully understand the problem. Just
I'm Italian.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm becoming Italian. So the Saudis had supported the Brotherhood in all sorts of different ways, and you look at the people with whom the Saudis worked in the 60s, in particular the 70s. I mean, you had Ma'mun al-Hadaibi, who was an advisor for a time to Prince Naif at the Ministry of Interior. You had Mohammed al-Sawaf, the distinguished, very senior Iraqi brother, who was in charge of educational scholarships for many years in the 1970s. Mohammed Mahdi Akif worked for the World Assembly of Muslim Youth, and so this is, you can go on and on with this connectivity. I think it's interesting to look at why the Saudis changed, because that tells you something about that should throw a light on the sort of policies that one might want to adopt in the West. The Saudis really changed. I mean, the invasion of Kuwait in 1990 was a big watershed where most national Brotherhood organizations essentially supported Saddam. They certainly did not support the Kuwaiti ruling family, and they didn't support external intervention to reverse the invasion. And that, I think, shook a lot of people in the Gulf. It shook. I mean, it's shaped Kuwaiti politics to this day, and I think it was a real wake-up call for the Saudis and for others. And I think the intersection. I mean, what Ahmed Tamim, the late, very distinguished Egyptian expert on the Brotherhood, called the Salafization of the Brotherhood, became a political issue for them. The Saudis for many, many years had rather complacently assumed that the Brotherhood, there may be brothers in Saudi Arabia, but the Brotherhood wasn't organized. There was no Marakib Aam in the kingdom. But then they realized, I think, that the influence of Brotherhood political activism on the shaping of the Sahwa, of the Islamic, the so-called Islamic revivalist movement, which took off in the late 60s and really became apparent in the 1980s, was profound. And that, of course, was a threat to them, because the Sahwa were also the people who petitioned against all sorts of things in the early 1990s, who were asking for revision of the system of rule and so forth. Now, you know, a lot of this is self-interested, but it's an interesting perspective on why this happened. In the Emirates, again, it was interesting, the people, and I had this a lot from people when I was doing the review, would say to me, you know, Mohammed bin Zayed is doing it, it's a whim. This has come out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere. I worked in the Emirates in the 1980s, and Islah, who were essentially the Emirati version of the Brotherhood, were all over the one university, Al-Ain University, at the time. The director of the university, Izzeddin Ibrahim, was an Egyptian Muslim brother, very long-standing, who had been entrusted with the education of the Beni Fatima by Sheikh Zayed. The then Minister of Education, when I first arrived in Abu Dhabi, Saeed Salman, who came from Ajmer, who had studied with Qaradawi and was a friend of Qaradawi, was also a brother, or certainly Brotherhood formed. And I think the Emiratis, I think Mohammed bin Zayed in particular, concluded this was a day in a state formed of 7 Emirates whose relations were from time to time very scratchy, with a movement based largely in the northern Emirates, challenging the political dispensation left after independence in 1971. I can see why he concluded that this was a problem. Now, you can argue about what they've done about it, but I think to understand this before you can actually make sensible conclusions about what your policy should be towards them, or indeed more generally towards the Brotherhood, on your own. Because ultimately, this is, if you think this is an important issue, and I think it is, then you need to be, it needs to be collective and it needs to be collegiate, the response. And that, of course, is one of the things that we have signally failed to do in the last decade on most things. And I'll stop there. I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Good.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your comments. Excellent insights. Can't wait to get back. We already have a lot of questions. We'll back to you shortly. Very delighted to have today also Ahmed Akkari. Ahmed was born in northern Lebanon, but grew up in Denmark, where at a young age he was recruited by and joined the local branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. In 2006, he played an important role in what came to be known as the Danish cartoons controversy. I know he will be speaking about it, so I don't want to steal his thunder on that. Shortly after the controversy, he left the organization and has since become a critic of it. He's a well-known public intellectual in Denmark and author of various acclaimed books. Ahmed, floor is yours.
Thanks, Lorenzo. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to join today. Well, my talk will be in 3 parts. First, I would like to make some reflections on why leave, and then why the fascination, and I will end talking about what approach I see could be possible. I start with why leave, my reflections over that, because I think it's the most important part of the talk. I'd just like to say that when you have a story like mine, any talk like this will be fragmented. You cannot avoid, you have to skip a lot of things, and that's why I would really recommend that you just go on and read Lorenzo's book, because I was also fascinated by it, even though I was part of it. because with a few corrections and very, very few critical points I had personally, I recognize his findings, and I really enjoyed reading about the other brothers who and sisters who left and their stories. So combined, you'll get a good picture, and it's written very fluently, and you will just enjoy it as well as people telling their stories. So it's not unamusing also to read, and it's also educating. I would also like to emphasize I don't hate the Muslim Brotherhood. So I actually owe many of my traits, stability, abilities in life to my education within the Brotherhood ranks. Because they take good care of the members. They give you a good ground positivity, and they make you like face life with like a big heart and all that. So you learn good things. You learn spiritual issues. Like I learned many empowering stuff. Like if you think of me as a Lebanese kid who came to Denmark as a child, running away from the war, divided between two cultures, they gave me like a stable view of life. But they were much larger than that, as I will talk about. But some of the things I got out of being part of the Brotherhood was the individual refinement and the holiness of the aspect in life. About the band of brothers, if you can say so. You learn really that you can feel like unity with others, and the combined idealism and realism that the organization has, just to mention a few. So I today really want to say that I respect my teachers and the unit leaders, the dentist who was the leader of the unit for some, and the banker and the cleric. There were people that came to mean a lot to me. They were close to me, and today I've lost contact with all of them because of my criticism of the organization and of the Islamic movements. But that does not mean that I do not still have good thoughts about people that I've known. Yeah, that's just to say that this is not a personal vendetta, and my participation in Lorenzo's book is actually to try and help the West understand a very complex organization and a part of Islam that's not all that clear to many. So why drop out? Everybody has his reasons, and many of them can be like personal, but I would also like to mention that Fathi Yakan, the Lebanese MP, former MP member of the parliament in Lebanon, he was a high-ranking Muslim Brotherhood man. He made a book analyzing why people leave. And I think the organization do that from time to time. They just go and look into why people leave, why they turn against them. And they try to find out how to keep people or get them back. Like still today, people are reaching out to me to try to say, hello, brother, where are you? And or something like that. So there are many various reasons. Some of them are like just like saying that they can be personal, and some reasons to leave can be much wider. My personal reasons are many, and they're really not one-sided. And it's just not about, okay, I didn't get that post, or that's not who I liked, or somebody opposed me. That's too smallish in my opinion. So I hope if people read the story, they will understand more of the background of why to leave. For me, it's a calculated choice. Leaving the Muslim Brotherhood was mostly because it's what's suitable for stability in the West and in the world. I'm part of Denmark, as I'm Lebanese and Muslim as well. And I need my society to be stable. I don't want it to get out into issues like we see in the Middle East. And this is exactly what will happen in time if we keep on going on these tracks. So you have this fight between the totalitarian society rules and the open society navigation way. And this is what my calculated plan was, that to say, we have to save this. This is not going well. So my biggest issue with the Muslim Brotherhood, my old friends, is that they're just not telling the truth about themselves in the West. And if there's something that made me join them in the beginning, that was finding some truth in life, finding some idealism. So not being honest, not being with one face, as you can say. I've seen that a lot in doctors and people working in politics and organizations from Sweden and to Germany and more south on. And Lorenzo reflects that as well in our stories. This was like my first part of my reflections on why to leave. A lot more to find in the book. Well, now people can ask what made me fascinated in the first place, and I can tell you there are many things that can fascinate you about, especially the Muslim Brotherhood, because they have this spiritual and very organized organization. It's visionary. It's at the same time tactical. It seems knowledgeable. It has like knowledgeable people, many writings, many cultivated people. It's like all round, like it's political, social, economical, intellectual, personal, community-based. It has really many elements that can attract people like me. It has leadership, nonetheless. Especially Hassan al-Banna was really a big major thing for I think anyone who will understand the Brotherhood will see it through the eyes of Hassan al-Banna, the teacher who died like on the way in his cause. So the Brotherhood actually attract people with abilities as well, more than the other organizations. And that has always been part of the strengths of the Brotherhood. And you know, the Brotherhood has the book and the sword logo, and it means that this is viewing Islam like a way of a mission, but also a fight and a struggle. All that attracted me really a lot. So I could see it was a clear thought, it was strong, there was a fight and there was a promise. And I loved that. That's why I started getting interested in it. And it was in the West at the same time non-violent, and is still. The Brotherhood has this policy in the West to be totally non-violent, and they are, by the way, really feeding on that, because they should thank the extreme Islamists, because of them they can say we are the moderate ones. I'll get back to that. But anyhow, it was the message, the mission, the struggle, and the idea of the promise. You know, this attracts young people, elderly people, people who lack some like big ideas in life, as I did once. And the story of Hassan al-Banna and the brothers. And the Brotherhood has basically this idea of changing society by changing the individual, then the family, then the society, then the nation. And from the nation, make a pan-Islamic nation. This is also part of Erdogan's plan today, if he can succeed, because he's actually trained and grown up as a brother. I know that because I was deep in the Muslim Brotherhood. And then the world unity under Islam's banners. This was how Hassan al-Banna formulated his vision for the world. So this idealism caught my attention. And then there are these way of doing things. You can also read about them in the book, as said. Then came the cartoon crisis that not only changed my life, but also 2 years after the crisis, 2008, made me go to the Lebanese local like membership house and ask for my resignation. And I went to Faisal Maulawi. He was really a big scholar, very, very gentle man. And I talked to him and had known him from before. And he's also a big name in Europe. He was one of the major founder of like the institute, or part of the institute in South France and other places. And he had also a great impact on helping the brothers get the fiqh, what can you say, the jurisprudence that makes them understand that the West is a place of dawah, not a place of fight. And that had kept the Brotherhood stable and out of trouble for 40, 50 years. This was one of his also major impact alongside Qaradawi and several others in the West. So basically, I really was on my way on the ladder to becoming like a missionary and the guy who had both the influence and who could keep on changing things in the world towards the Muslim Brotherhood. But I found also that there were a lot of Machiavellism I didn't like, and double-faced actions, the lurking, the tides, and the personal vendettas, and the use of people. It's the same you will find in other people's stories as well, among other issues. There's also this very deeply ideological case of, are we going to create a totalitarian view of life? And how will it go? Like, how will we treat, if I was a brotherhood, I will come to power, how would I treat the Salafis? How would I treat the Hizb ut-Tahrir? How would I treat the Sufis and all that? You know, when you become totalitarian and you have only one view of the truth, you have difficulty of accepting the diversity. And this has been a problem for the Muslim Brotherhood, also in the West, also engaging in politics. So to end my talk with the last point is what to do. This is really, really difficult, as I all just got confirmed by what Sir John Jenkins just said. You guys are really way behind, sorry to say so. You know, Lorenzo is like paving the road, but I don't know how many of you really understand Islamism and how harder it is to understand the Muslim Brotherhood. Because if you don't even grasp Islamism really deep, even the researchers does not. I know several of them, I don't know, but sometimes, whoa, they are not really getting the whole picture. And the Muslim Brotherhood is not as easy to grasp as well. So you have to understand Islamism, like political Islam. Then you have to understand the big complexity and dynamics of the Muslim Brotherhood. So if you ask me if the Muslim Brotherhood is a moderate organization, yes and no. Yes, in the West, a very, very moderate organization, because they do not agree on fighting, on killing, on the jihadist movement. But they are not liberal and definitely not democratic in that sense of way the West understands itself and understands democratic. The Muslim Brotherhood has the ability to renew itself and to change course, and they just need the guidance from the guidance council and the clerics, and they can change the course. So if one day it will become important to fight in the West, in the United States, on one side or another, not now, but if the West gets more divided, maybe some interference from foreign countries, the Muslim Brotherhood will revise their policies. But for the moment, it's the democratic way, it's organizations, it's building up, and it's also keeping some people in secrecy, because you need not to show all your cards. And this is what made this famous organization like survive even under Nasser in Egypt, his harsh fist, even after Ataturk like hit them very hard. Now you see 50, 60 years after, it's a brotherhood like state in moderate brotherhood state in Turkey. So the brotherhood are resilient, they are dynamic, they are secretive, they are active, they are compartmental, they are global. They are tough, adaptable, selective, they have a great appeal, and they have a flow, and they are visionary. And understanding this, you can understand it's not easy to just make some policies just to solve the problem just at once. Fortunately, you can say the Muslim Brotherhood is also just a bunch of people, guys, with interests. They fight among each other. Sometimes they lack the idealism, all that kind of stuff that made me actually very disappointed as well. So I can put it. I tried to put it like in a way, if you ask a question and get an answer, if you ask, is the Muslim Brotherhood moderate? You can say yes. And if you say, is the Muslim Brotherhood radical? You can say yes as well. So if you put the two questions, you can say they're both moderate and they're radical. Depends on where they are in the world and in what time they are working. Are they democratic? Yes. Totalitarian? Yes. Changeable? Yes. Fundamental? Yes. Compatible? Yes. A challenge? Yes. Are they open or secretive? Both answers are yes. Are they peaceful, intellectual? Yes. Are they fighting revolutionaries at the same time? Yes. So it makes it complex. It needs a lot of work, a lot of understanding. And I know many hotshots out there with Islam researchers. They just give their opinions and the politicians just go for it. But I think you really need to start over now with maybe Lorenzo's book to get a deeper understanding of the whole situation. The Muslim Brotherhood has even people who are not members, but who actually have the mindset. And this is very important for Islam's biggest organization, that many people has the mindset without knowing it. You know, big clerics in the world, John Jenkins mentioned the Saudis. The Saudi Medina University was ran by Syrian and Egyptian brother people who fled from Egypt and got to live in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. And they
Mind if I stop you there? Unfortunately, time is a tyrant.
I'm finished. I just want to say that I'm watching the effects from inside the Muslim Brotherhood and outside in Egypt and in the West. And yeah, this is one of the big challenges in the coming time. And I hope we all go to a more peaceful understanding one day. Because life needs it. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Ahmed. Thank you very much. I think you captured very well a lot of the complexities that come with the Brotherhood. I have to scold you for the excessive promotion of my work.
That wasn't.
I appreciate it. I'm kidding.
Done, but I'm sorry if that wasn't. Yeah.
Let me just say, Ahmed was one of the former members of the Brotherhood I had the privilege of interviewing for the book. You know, I'm very thankful to the dozen or so individuals that spent days with me. In the case of Ahmed, I went to see him up in Greenland, and we had a long time, and that was the same with the other former members of the Brotherhood, in trying to understand the process of joining, the process of leaving, and everything in between. In my short time, I'd like to talk about something different. We are a US-based center. We have two European guests, so we talked a lot about Europe. I want to bring the conversation a bit to the US, and in a way, in a comparative way, still keeping Europe in mind. And what I want to talk about is the very big gap that exists between Europe and the United States when it comes to the debate on Islamism. In a nutshell, that is what I'm talking about. Although dynamics change from country to country, there is a growing, very strong debate throughout Europe about political Islam and the Brotherhood in particular, and its impact on European society. But this debate is increasingly mainstream, and it is bringing forward very practical policy solutions. Some right, some wrong, we can discuss that, but there's a lot of movement. There is almost nothing of that debate taking place in the US right now. So let me first briefly talk about what's happening in Europe with unavoidable simplifications, and then we move to the US and the lack of action and debate in the US. Now, Europeans have been debating Islamism, the Brotherhood, for a long time. We go back to the Rushdie affairs, the first hijab controversies in France in the early 90s. There's always this debate about the impact of what the Germans call legalistic Islamists, groups that for the most part operate within the law. They carry out activities that are per se non-illegal, but obviously, according to many, problematic. And there's a big debate, of course. I always like to call them the optimists and the pessimists. The optimists, those that see the brothers simply as conservative religious group that is working for integration and that accepts the democratic process, and the pessimists, those that have a very different outlook on this. Over the last 3 or 4 years, I would say probably as we have seen a decline in terrorist attacks, and there's been more attention into the less evident threat that is terrorism, and more sort of what some consider the more long-term threat of political Islam. And what I think is very noteworthy in Europe is that the concerns no longer come mostly from the center-right of the political spectrum, as I think was the case 10, 15 years ago, but it's an increasingly a mainstream attitude. The concerns are two, mainly, and there is, I'm simplifying things a lot. The main one is societal. It's the concern that groups like the Brotherhood create a polarizing impact on European society. They mainstream to their very broad apparatus of mosques, of organizations, an us and them mindset, which sometimes degenerates into an us versus them mindset, which is very harmful to integration and social cohesion. There is also secondary concern, which has to do more with radicalization, with terrorism. I agree with the assessment that has been made by Ahmed, by Sir John, that the Brotherhood is not engaged in terrorism in the West. There's a very conscious decision not to do that. But I think many would argue that the Brotherhood creates sort of a fertile environment for other groups to seize upon, creates sort of a mainstreams a narrative that is not that difficult for other groups to then build upon and radicalize. Now, that is the assessment of pretty much every continental European security service. I think we might want to get back to Sir John when it comes to MI5 and 6, if that's an agreement. There is a bit of a difference between sort of the Anglo-Saxon world and continental Europe. But when it comes to continental Europe, I would say there's pretty much a consensus when it comes to the security services on the impact of the Brotherhood on social cohesion. Let me read here a couple of quotes that I brought together from different services. This is from Austrian intelligence. The Brotherhood ideology in its core contradicts the Western democratic understanding of coexistence, equality of men and women, the political order, and the fundamental principles of the Constitution of the Republic of Austria. Belgium, the Netherlands, France, you will find pretty much the same assessment. Arguably, the toughest on the Brotherhood are the Germans. German security services, whether at the federal or at the state level, are very harsh in their assessments of the Brotherhood. This is from a federal agency. It says, groups like the Brotherhood represent an especial threat to the internal cohesion of our society. Their activities run counter to the efforts undertaken by the federal administration and the states to integrate immigrants. Another report by North Rhine-Westphalia, largest state in Germany population-wise, says, in the long run, the threat posed by legalistic Islamism to the liberal democratic system is greater than that of jihadism. And that's quite a statement. But it is something that is becoming more and more mainstream. If anybody has listened to more than one speech that French President Macron has given over the last year and a half on Islamism, on what in France is called as communitarism, is very aware of this dynamic that is very, very mainstream. Now, that is not to say that it's unanimous, that everybody agrees with this, but there's an increasingly mainstream concern about this. And of course, there's a big debate about what to do about it. I think that's the wall Sir John faced. Okay, even if we come to the same assessment, what the challenge is, what do you do about a group that operates largely within the law? So it's very, very tricky. We've seen a few efforts just over the last few days. The French Senate introduced a bill with a set of measures trying to basically challenge the influence of political Islam in French society. Just yesterday, the Austrian government created an observatory on political Islam, which is basically going to study activities of Brotherhood and similar groups in Austria. But of course, what to do about groups like that is a big dilemma for any democratic society. Now, if we switch to the US, we barely see any of this kind of debate that is very alive in Europe. Now, there's a lot of debate about jihadism, of course. It was bigger a couple of years ago for obvious reasons. There is a debate, of course, in the States about the Brotherhood, about political Islam, but it is, for the most part, let's say 99.9% about the Middle East, about abroad. And that's fair, but there's virtually nothing about what happens domestically. And it's always through the lenses of security. The debate is, whenever the name Brotherhood comes up in debate in the US, it's about designation. It's very black or white. Either the Brotherhood is a terrorist organization that needs to be designated, or the Brotherhood is an organization we should not concern ourselves with, because we're not terrorists. So that's fine, that's good enough. And I think in what Ahmed said, what Sir John said, we see a lot of gray, because the Brotherhood is very much of a gray, occupies a gray area where it can be seen in different ways, and one needs a lot of nuance. Why is that different in the States compared to Europe? I think there's a lot of overlapping reasons. We can go on for ages to discuss that. There is a smaller Islamist problem in the US compared to Europe. I think that's fair to say. That's not to say there's less of a Brotherhood problem. If I were to probably count by numbers, I think the Brotherhood in the US, for reasons that have to do with the background of its members, Brotherhood being an elite group, as Ahmed was explaining, there's a very large membership in the US. But generally speaking, Islamism is not that much of a problem in the US compared to most Western European countries. It does exist, but it's not as big of a problem. I think a second reason is the different cultural approach to integration in general in America compared to Europe. I think it's fair to say that America is more used to tolerating all sorts of views, beliefs, and lifestyles, where Europeans are more into this concept of more homogeneous societies, and therefore we're more concerned about severe deviations from the norm. There's not to say that there's no freedom of speech or freedom for very radical thinking in Europe, but it is different. And I think the third element, which is also very cultural, and this is not passing a judgment, is the lack of a domestic intelligence agency in the US. As I said earlier, in Europe, the assessment and the knowledge on these groups is very much driven by domestic intelligence agencies. The German domestic intelligence agency is called Verfassungsschutz, protection of the Constitution. There's nothing equivalent to the US. The FBI is a terrific law enforcement agency, arguably the best in the world, but doesn't really do domestic intelligence gathering on groups that are politically subversive. It used to do so a long time ago. It got into a lot of trouble for doing that, and nobody's advocating necessarily the FBI doing that. But that's just the situation, so without saying whether it's right or wrong. But that leads to basically a lack of interest there. There is some debate, of course. You have some fairly marginalized individuals and networks in the States that debate this. To be honest, that's my personal judgment. They do so in a very unnuanced way for the most part. I don't like the word Islamophobia, but I think at times to some of the networks that are very critical of Islamism, that word does apply fittingly. Even when Trump came to the White House, I think a lot of people thought, probably Islamists themselves in the US thought it was gonna be trouble for them, and actually has not been in the least. I think it's fair to say that the president and some of it in his administration have often used a very crude and divisive language when speaking about Islam, but they're not taking any concrete action to counter Islamism domestically, and that's a very interesting paradox. So I think it's something to be debated. Since we're shamelessly promoting myself today, I don't want to do that, but I have an article that came out today for Hudson that talks about that and advocates for, to some degree, with all the differences that exist, cultural and political, in the States, of looking at some of the more nuanced and mature debate on Islamism that is taking place in Europe, and importing some of that in the US. I see we have a lot of questions, and so let me conclude my remarks and read some of his questions and ask them to both Ahmed and Sir John. Quite a few questions about Turkey, the role of Turkey in supporting the Brotherhood. You touched upon it, Ahmed. I'm going to just toss the questions out there, and then maybe both of you want to briefly address it. Keep in mind we have 10 minutes. We have a very specific question for Sir John. It says, if we cannot call the Brotherhood terrorists, can we call the Brotherhood extremists? If so, if the Brotherhood is not prescribed by law in the UK or elsewhere, should we apply the agenda put forward with the UK Commission for Countering Extremism, such as closing down of meetings and ensuring that there is no funding? And then there was another question a bit about the review process, and that is from Catherine Wheeler, about how did most of the Brotherhood members interviewed self-identify? Did they identify more as a terrorist organization, as political social movement, or something else? And then specifically for Ahmed, again, I'm being very evil because there's no way you guys can answer to all these questions. You've been very quick on the Danish cartoons, and there's a couple of people who are asking about exactly what the role of the Brotherhood was, and yours specifically, on during those troubled times during the cartoon controversy. So if we can go first to Sir John, if you can lump those questions, and we'll move to Ahmed.
Okay, so I'll approach this with something you said, Lorenzo, about MI5 security service and MI6 external intelligence service here. I think if you're in continental Europe, because there are constitutions, you can use the constitution as a point of point d'appui, of a reference point. So the Verfassungsschutz in Germany, just like in Austria, and actually the equivalent agency in the Netherlands, can describe Islamists as Verfassungsfeinde or Verfassungsfeindlich. So they are enemies of the constitution or inimical to the constitution, because the values on which the constitution is based, which is the political order is based, are expressed there specifically. In French, that function is performed by the concept of laïcité. In the Anglo-American sphere, this does not exist. What the US does have, though, is the ability to go fast after illicit money flows and other illicit actions on the basis of wiretaps and other covertly obtained intelligence. And this was something, of course, that played a huge role in the Holy Land Foundation trial 15 years ago, which was an extraordinary moment. And that's something we lack, actually, in the UK. And I think it's something that probably more generally across Europe, we lack this ability to focus like lasers on money, activities, and hate speech, these three things together, because you need to look at what individuals do and where money goes. The question of extremists and terrorists is related to this, it seems to me, whether you're extremist or a terrorist. I think in the West, as you said, I mean, the Brotherhood has a very checkered history when it comes to violence over the last 100 years, 93 years. But this issue of extremism is really an issue of the threat to a liberal order. Now, I think certainly in the Anglosphere, we think of ourselves as living in some perfect Lockean democracy. Only somebody who's never read John Locke can actually believe this. Locke, of course, in his essay on toleration, tolerates everybody except Catholics. I'm a Catholic. And the reason he didn't tolerate Catholics is because he said they owe allegiance to an external power, the Pope. It's this transnationalism, which is a fundamental, actually, tenet of all Islamists, because they believe in a universal ummah. And what they do with this is try to create subaltern communities of perpetual grievance inside a liberal order, which is one of the reasons the Muslim Association of Britain, the Muslim Council of Britain, and so forth, want to act as gatekeepers. Is that a threat? Yes, it is. It's a threat to integration. It's a threat to liberal values, as you yourself said. The sort of things that the Verfassungsschutz in Germany articulated the problem are there. So I couch it in that sort of area. The review, how do they identify? They identify as generally as we have made a strategic decision to forego violence ever since the 1970s. We are silmi'in. We are entirely peaceful. Well, up to a point they were. And of course, nobody self-identifies as a terrorist. But did I believe them? I believe half of what they said, and half of what they said I didn't believe.
I think if you can speak very briefly, Turkey, role of Turkey.
I mean, well, as Ahmed said, Erdogan, who of course comes out of a particular tradition, Erdogan and the Norsi tradition and so forth, is a fascinating character. Erdogan was, I'm reliably informed, quite close to Mohammed Qutb. Now, Mohammed Qutb, of course, was Said Qutb's brother. Mohammed Qutb taught at Akkari University for many, many years, and was a theorist of jihad and of takfir, for that matter. I have been told, and I have no reason to doubt this is true, that Bilal Erdogan is in business with Mohammed Qutb's son, who are both linked to Yassin Qadi, who of course is a Saudi Egyptian businessman who is on a UN terror list. So if you look at these, it's personal connections, actually, that seem to me to be absolutely fundamental to this. If you look at what the Turks are doing in Europe through the diyānāt, trying to exert their authority on large Turkish expatriate communities in Europe, this is both an extension of Turkish national power and also a reflection of Erdogan's, I don't know how you describe it, Islamist, neo-Ottoman ambitions to be the major shaper of opinion, not just for Turks or for Muslims in the Middle East, but Muslims globally. I think he has those sort of aspirations. And don't remember, it's in 2023. It's going to be the 100th anniversary of the abolition of the caliphate.
Excellent, Ahmed.
Well, I'm glad for Sir Jenkins' answers. Maybe I could just say that if people have any further questions, they could maybe just, I'm on Facebook. My name is Ahmed Akari, or they can write to the email akari888@yahoo.com for maybe about this cartoon crisis issues or other issues, because I see time is up and no time to talk about it. I end my story, or Lorenzo ends my story by I'm saying that I say today I clearly see Europe, despite its deficiencies, as a place for the world to look up to. As said in the old days, as Rome falls, so does the world. So problem is maybe that Europeans and maybe Americans are no longer looking at ideas, but everything's just about material goods, and that's why maybe we lack the understanding that people are moved by ideology. And this is also an answer to why maybe Trump hasn't addressed this issue in practical life, because there are many more complexes in it than just the words. But if people need answers on any questions, maybe through Lorenzo, I can give some answers. You have my email as well, Lorenzo. People can get it and write. And I'm on Facebook, Ahmed Akkari. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. And perfectly on time, Swiss style. Want to thank everybody for attending today. We had a very good attendance. Very happy about that. Want to thank everybody who participated. And I'm sure anybody, if we're in a physical space, would join me with big applause in thanking both Sir John and Ahmed Akari for participating today, bringing their personal experience and knowledge on a very complicated topic. So on behalf of the program on extremism, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing everybody soon. Goodbye.